What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka New York Prepper, and I wanted to do a video about my experiences working as a bouncer for 15 years. I wanted to talk about what I learned about SHTF and lessons I learned related to self-defense and human nature and the way people can behave. Working as a bouncer, I learned a lot about how people behave and practical self-defense and the real world, how people really behave when there's a fight or how violent situations occur. Because I feel that a lot of people, although they've had training and maybe they went to the military but they were never deployed, or even like a lot of law enforcement officers that don't really get their hands dirty. A lot of different people, martial artists, they don't have a practical understanding of violence and how people can be when they're in a enraged state. And I'm here to give you guys some practical advice and share with you some of the lessons that I learned. And so I'll give you a little bit of my background. So at the age of 18, I started working at my first bar that I ever worked at. I was 18 years old and I was in college, and I worked at a bar as a bouncer. And that's when I was first exposed to the violence of people and how violent people can be. I was actually working there one night, and one of my friends came in to visit, and he came with his girlfriend at the time, and his girlfriend got really jealous of him because some girl came over and started talking to him. So his girlfriend took a glass jar, not a jar, glass, like a drinking glass, and smashed it over that girl's face. And that girl was just totally messed up. Her face, she had to get like 150 stitches. But I remember just walking over and just seeing like a pool of blood on the floor. I just saw this girl sitting there, and there was a puddle. And when I say puddle, it was like 3 feet in diameter of just blood on the floor. And she was holding her face, and this was a pretty girl, and she got attacked, by this crazy ex-girlfriend of my friend's, and ruined her face forever. She has a scar now. She had 150 stitches. That was my first exposure to the real world and how people can be violent. And I learned that when you're one thing I learned is that bad things happen when you least expect it. And same thing with SHTF. Things happen when you don't expect it to happen. Like that night, the last thing I was thinking of is, my friend's girlfriend is gonna come in and smash a a heavy glass cup, over somebody's face. I never expected that. That was the last thing on my mind. It was just nice to see my friend show up and be able to talk to him and hang out. That was the last thing I was expecting. So that was my first exposure to like real violence in my life. At the age of 18, that was my first exposure to brutal violence. And it showed me human nature and how brutal people can be. So that was like my first real experience. And then, so I worked as a bouncer on and off, for probably about 15 years. I started at 18, and through like most of my early to mid 20s, I worked pretty steadily as a bouncer in a variety of clubs, nightclubs, bars. I've pretty much done everything. And as far as security goes in nightclubs, I've worked inside of busy nightclubs with live bands on stage, even with like famous bands. And I've also worked at small bars. I've done doors. I've done everything. So I know the whole business and I know how it works. And like I said, I've had probably 15 years of experience. I finally got out of it last year. because I'm getting older now, so I'm not gonna, there's no need for me to do that anymore. Um, so so I have a lot of practical, real world experience as in hand to hand combat situations where I've had to use my hands to restrain people, to separate people, to defend myself, to defend other people. Now, obviously, a lot of guys out there, they don't take bouncers seriously, especially like I know a lot of like law enforcement officers, they look at a bouncer and they think that we're like, we're a joke, that we don't actually use force, that we don't know anything, we don't know what we're doing, that we're just like a bunch of meatheads, and that's not true. I mean, just because I was a security guard doesn't mean I don't have any skills, doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm doing, and as a security guard, I had a lot of power to defend property and defend other people. I was totally justified to use force, and I had to use force probably several hundred times. I've had to use force to restrain people, to remove them physically. It's not easy to physically grab somebody and physically move them out of a building, and I don't think a lot of people understand how difficult that is. And for a lot of you guys that are in the military or law enforcement, as a bouncer, you don't have backup, you don't have a badge, you don't have a gun, you don't have a taser, you don't have pepper spray, you have nothing. All I have is my bare hands. That's all I had. And if I'm working for somebody, and there's a rowdy guy in the bar who's causing problems, he's touching women in the wrong places, and they're not asking for it. He's starting fights with other people, or he may already be in a fight with somebody. I mean, I'm the front line, I have to deal with this guy. I can't just let him go around, bothering people or even being physically violent and assaulting other people. And I'm justified within the law to use force on somebody like that, to remove them out of the building. And to physically grab somebody and be able to remove someone physically just with your hands, with no taser, no pepper spray, no badge, nothing, no backup, no radio, no support, takes a lot of skill, and it takes a lot of intelligence. You got to know, how to act. You got to know when to act. You got to know what to do. So to physically be able to move someone out of a building like that when they don't want to leave, it's not an easy thing to do. A lot of times they fight back. A lot of times they try to punch you, or they try to kick you. I've had people try to kick me in the groin. I've had people try to kick my knees. I've had people do all kinds of things. I've had a lot of people do things to me. So so I learned practically how people behave, and that's what qualifies me to talk about self-defense. I'm not a martial artist. I wasn't in the military. I wasn't in law enforcement, but I worked as a bouncer for many, many years, and in very bad conditions. I worked in some nightclubs that had a lot of gangs in there. Some of the gangs came from large cities, nearby cities. And like, for example, one of the clubs that I worked at, they had a hip-hop night. It was usually like on Friday nights, where local amateur hip-hop performers would show up and perform. And obviously, in those inner city type of amateur hip-hop performers are usually going to attract, gangs and stuff like that. So it always turned into a brawl, because you had one gang and then another gang, and, they were fighting in the club. And, it was up to me and my coworkers to separate everybody and control the situation. I have a lot of practical experience, dealing with people, in violent people. We're not talking about college students here. We're talking about, inner city gang members that pretty much, they have criminal records, a lot of them. A lot of them just don't really care about, they'll just use violence without even thinking twice about it. And I've had to deal with those kinds of people. So I know, what it's like practically to use physical force. and deal with violent people. So that's what qualifies me to talk about things like restraining people, using restraints, using different self-defense techniques, because I've actually had to use that stuff in real life. So some of the other things I want to talk about is, like I said, I learned to expect the unexpected with people, so you never know when somebody's going to snap and turn violent. It could happen at any time, and you really don't know who you're dealing with and how crazy they are. So I'll share like some experiences with you. So one time, I was pretty nice to this guy, and I asked him to, stop, being rowdy. And I really wasn't. I could have been nasty to him. I could have, really been like nasty and tried to embarrass him. But I was trying to be nice to him, and he actually took a swing at me, And that was something I totally did not expect at all, because I was trying to give this guy multiple chances. I was nice to him, and out of nowhere he just took a swing at me, and it just tells you that you really don't know what somebody's thinking about. And that's why I've said in my videos in the past that you should always keep distance from somebody. Always want to be at least arm's length away. So if that person has a knife and they pull it out and you don't have a chance to react, that they can't stab you with it, you always want to keep distance from somebody, because you never know what they're thinking. So this guy came, he swung, and luckily for me, I was paying attention and I was alert, and I was able to basically move my head out of the way. I just did a simple boxing technique. I box, so I just kind of bobbed and weaved out of the way, and he missed his punch entirely. But it taught me that you never know what somebody's thinking, so you always got to keep distance from them. And you also have to be alert. You have to pay attention to what their hands are doing, what their body language is like, so this way you can have some indicators as to, what they're going to do before they do it. I've seen very evil things done. I've seen people get stabbed and stuff like that. There's no limit to the evil that people can do, and you always have to remember that people can be really evil. And also, small people can be very, very strong. One of the worst situations I encountered was actually a guy that came into the club that I worked at, and he had a knife on him, and it was on one of those hip hop nights, and I don't know if somebody was I guess they were trying to jump him, and he pulled out his knife and he started swinging it all around in different directions. And my coworker put him in a chokehold to try to control him, and my coworker ended up getting slashed in the leg because he took his knife and slashed his leg right open. But he was only probably, I had to guess, maybe 160 pounds, very skinny, and it took 5 or 6 of us to control him, and we were all 250 to 300 pound men in the prime of our lives. You're talking about football players, military guys, and it took 5 of us to keep this little man under control. He was going nuts, and so finally me and my coworker, we grabbed the guy's forearm, and we were able to control the knife. We grabbed his forearm, and that prevented him from swinging it, and then we kind of shook the knife out of his hand. We slammed his hand on the ground, we grabbed it and we started shaking it, but small people can be very dangerous as well. Never underestimate somebody who's small, because if they're in a crazy state of mind or they're on drugs, they can be very hard to control. So that's another thing I learned, is don't underestimate somebody. Keep your distance. And then, another situation, I had to speak to 2 guys that were fighting over a girl. One of the guys was the ex-boyfriend, and the other guy was the new boyfriend, and they happened to be at the same place, and the girl was there too, obviously. So these 2 guys were basically looking at each other from across the bar, and they looked like they were gonna get into a fight. So I was watching them all night, and then they started getting closer, and at one point they were getting face to face with each other, and I decided to walk over there and basically put myself in between them and try to separate them so it didn't escalate. And next thing I know, I turn around and I see a big knife. One of the guys pulled out a big folding knife, probably had like a 4-inch blade, and he was only like a foot away from me, and he was holding it out in front of me and basically threatening me with it. So another thing I learned with that was, never turn your back on somebody. And same thing, keep your distance. I was too close to that guy, and I should have never done that. If I was further away, even if he pulled the knife out and tried to stab me, it wouldn't have reached. But I got too close and I turned my back. So never turn your back on a stranger. If you don't know somebody, never turn your back on them. Another thing too is, I learned that you have to react quickly. If something happens and you're in a self-defense scenario, you have to act quick and very decisively. If you're not decisive and you don't make a quick decision, then you're not going to survive. And I had one situation where I went into the crowd, and this was at a larger nightclub, and I saw that there was possibly some kind of a fight going on. So I walked down into the crowd, and in the nightclub that I worked at, obviously it's a nightclub, so it's dark and there's not a lot of visibility. So a lot of times, a lot of these guys, they feel empowered, because they feel that they can get away with something because there's no cameras that are going to be able to see, into the crowd because it's dark. So I was investigating, and I'm looking around to see what's going on, and all of a sudden I feel someone grab my forearms and put them behind my back, and they were trying to hold my forearms behind my back. And I mean, obviously that's a bad idea. I mean, I'm a strong dude, so how stupid would you try to be to restrain me like that? But in that situation, you never know. If somebody's trying to hold your arms behind you, you never know, what the other person is, if they have a friend that's going to come and try to hit you or stab you or whatever. So you have to react quickly and respond in that situation. So somebody grabbed my arms and tried to hold them, and obviously I'm a strong dude. I'm a power lifter. Back then I was even stronger than I am now. I was more into the powerlifting. So I was able to break free, and then I was able to respond with necessary force to that person who tried to restrain me and neutralize him temporarily with the use of a right hook to the jaw. And he dropped like a bag of potatoes pretty much. One shot and he was down. But in that situation, I didn't know what he was going to do, what if he had any friends with him or whatever. So you have to react quickly and decisively, especially if somebody's trying to restrain you before they get their grip on you and before they really tighten up. You have to slip out of it and counterattack as quickly as possible. Same thing if you see somebody trying to like put you in a choke or put you in a headlock. You have to react quick, because once they lock the chokehold or once they lock you into some type of a restraint, it's very hard to get out of it at that point. So if like somebody's trying to choke you, the best thing you do is drop your chin down just like this, and it'll block them from hitting your neck. You just drop your chin, and that's the easiest way to protect yourself from that. Finally, another thing I learned is that when you're in a self-defense scenario, you're a lot stronger than you think. Because your adrenaline is pumping, and you're fighting for your life. And your body goes into survival mode. So you have to be very careful about the force that you're using, because you can easily, severely injure somebody. Because your body is made for survival in that situation. Your adrenaline is pumping, and you're going to be like 10 times stronger than you normally are. So you have to really be careful with the amount of force that you use, and make sure that you're not using too much force. So that's another thing to think about. And as far as like SHTF goes, for SHTF, the lesson that I learned is that always expect the unexpected. Things happen when you least expect it. All the situations that I encountered as a bouncer I never expected them, you know, like the guy pulling the knife on me, the guy trying to swing at me. I've even had people chase me in their car. You know, I was driving home from work one night and somebody chased me home and they tried to run me off the road, you know, and these are all things I never expected. You know, I was just trying to go home. You know, I thought everything was cool, and all of a sudden I see this car coming behind me, and they try to ram my vehicle, and they're trying to ram me, you know, off the side of the shoulder. So, you know, things happen when you least expect it, so you need to always be able to react quickly. And you can't get into like a panic mode, because if you're in a panic mode, you're going to be paralyzed, and you're not going to be able to respond effectively. So, you know, but you know, just to give you guys, you know, a little bit of an example of how bad some of these places I worked at. I mean, one of the places I worked at, they used to have like probably 10 cops or 20 cops. You know, at night they would stand outside with dogs. You know, especially on the hip hop nights, because it was just so bad. You know, there was brawls, there was shootings, there was stabbings. It was bad. You know, and you know, I've seen people get their neck cut open. I saw one guy get jumped, and they must have cut his neck, and he came over to me and asked me for help, and you know, I could see the blood squirting out of his neck, you know, with the pulse of his heart, so they hit his artery, you know, and he was asking me for help. At that time, I didn't really know too much about, you know, tourniquets or emergency medicine, but you know, emergency medicine is a very important thing, you know, being able to control bleeding. But, you know, that just told me how vicious people are, you know. People are very vicious, especially like a lot of these gang members. You know, they don't care, and, you know, they have nothing to lose, a lot of them. So you really have to, you know, understand who you're dealing with. I think that's pretty much it for this video. You know, so I hope you guys learned something from my experience, and you know, I'm not trying to like brag or try to sound like I'm a badass or anything like that, because I really don't think I am. I was just doing my job, you know, but I definitely have a lot of experience in hand-to-hand situations, and I don't really talk about it that much because it's not that interesting, but you know, just for anybody out there that watches my channel and they question my, you know, credentials to talk about self-defense, and those are my credentials. My credentials was that, you know, I worked as a bouncer for almost 15 years on and off at some really bad clubs, and you know, I've had to deal with some very violent people and very violent situations. I never got seriously injured. I never got shot. I never got stabbed. I never got arrested, never got sued, so I knew what I was doing, and I handled myself well, and you know, I was effective at my job. I used the necessary force without going beyond what was needed, you know, so those are my qualifications. You know, if you guys are interested in any more of my bouncing stories, I mean, I could tell so many stories, you know, I have a ton of stories, but maybe I'll do that on a live stream one day. So, you know, that's pretty much it, guys. Remember the 3 P's: prepare, practice, and persevere. Take care, and God bless.